Who's ever seen a real life hermaphrodite before? You? You guys are my friends. Anyone else? Now you have. I am a living, walking, talking, breathing, real life hermaphrodite. But that word's kind of messed up, so don't use it. Only I can use it, and a few other people that are actually intersex as well. My name's Jen Pagonis. I was born and raised in Chicago on the northwest side. I still live there, but I live way more north. And I'm a graduate student at DePaul, and I study this topic and as well as health communication. And recently I was in Sweden at an Intersex conference, which was really cool. It was the second annual, only the second one ever, for the International Lesbian and Gay Association. And I was just in DC last weekend for my birthday, on my birthday, talking to a group of powerful people that do human rights works in the Americas. And we were telling them that what happens to us as intersex infants is indeed torture, and trying to get them to help us recognize that across the countries in the Americas. Today's presentation is gonna go roughly like this, but there's gonna be a few changes because we're gonna watch a film that's never been shown in America before. Just kidding, it has, but only a few times. And it's from New Zealand, and it's made by a really dear friend of mine named Manny Mitchell. It's called Intersex. So it's gonna be like a really good film. It's a really good treat. We're gonna talk about gender and sexuality, break that down a little bit, and ask you guys questions. Then we're gonna go into the history of intersexuality, mainly in the West. And then we're gonna look at modern day representations in the media of intersex folks, do a little small group breakout, and then we're gonna look at the film. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A. So please stay through it all. Advance, please. On this slide, we have what typically looks like a representation of sex and gender. On the left, you see a man, and on the right, you see a female person, and you see the appropriate chromosomes on each end. What intersex does, you can click, is flips that on its axis. And it kind of sometimes has people that appear phenotypically female on the outside, so they'll have breasts, hips, what appears to be a functioning normal vagina, quote unquote normal. Every time I say normal, it's quote unquote. And internally, they might have testes, XY chromosomes. They will not have fallopian tubes. They won't have a cervix. They won't have their period. They won't get their period and things like that. On the other end, you might have someone that looks phenotypically like a male on the outside and have, quote unquote, the opposite stuff on the inside. So that's a rough breakdown of what intersex is in terms of the biomedical model. Next slide, please. On the screen, I don't know if anyone familiar with this, if you do like work with youth. Yes, okay, it's like really good resource. So if you Google and write this in your notes if you have notes, genderbread person 2.0, don't get the 1.0. This is like an Apple software. You do not want the first version. The second version is way better and easier, and I think this is the second version. Yeah, 2.0. So I'm not gonna go into it for the sake of time, but just put it in your notes, and it's a really good tool to use when people have those questions. Well, how do we talk about that gender is not the same as sex or vice versa? It lets you have more flexibility in that realm, and I'll let you just kind of digest what you see on the screen and maybe think about how you can use it in the future. It's a great tool for trans youth, intersex youth, gender nonconforming youth, or anybody, just to be a little bit more up to date on what's going on with gender and sexuality. Next, please. So I turn to you all. I'm making the cameraman work. Does anybody think or want to answer this question? And of course, you probably know my answer because you're smart enough to think what I think the answer is, but I want to hear, do you guys, and I flip-flop with this too, I'm not set in stone with an answer. Do you guys think sex equals gender? Is it cut and dry? I see some head nodding. Does anybody want to explain what they think? And I'm good at waiting. I like to make you guys feel awkward, so I will wait. It's good water. I see students in the first row. Blue shirt.
Me?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, it's something I've never thought about. So this is like all new to me.
Okay.
But I guess in the past, I would say that, sex equals gender.
Great.
But I have an open mind to hear otherwise.
Great. Okay, cool. So with that said, I mean, I did too growing up. And people like Judith Butler and some other gender theorists like to play with this concept. And they like to look at the fact that gender is actually, in their mind, constituted in the repetitive acts of daily life that we do. So, for instance, when I was in high school, I wish I could show you my picture. I might have, oh, in the film, you'll see me in high school. I was like the most feminine person you have ever met in your life. But it wasn't work. It was work. Like, it was work. It took time. It was a pattern, a daily ritual. And I remember throwing my makeup away. I'm very I get obsessed with something and then I end it right away. So I threw all my makeup away, and I threw all my clothes away, and I shaved my head. And that was work, to be able to walk out of the house without makeup on. That was scary that first week or two or months. And I would still wear earrings. So I was like, I want everyone to know I'm a girl. But what is that saying? That doesn't say anything about my biology. I wanted people to read me as a woman. And that is where the gender comes in, and that repetitive reading by our audience in daily life. So we're gonna break that down with intersex people, and we're gonna go into history. Who loves history? Next slide, please. You might have to click it twice. I should never turn my back on the camera. Okay, so instead of history, we're gonna do hermstory. And herm is short for hermaphrodite. So, and I will need my notes. This is from 1889. Facts revealed by Godard's knife sheds light upon the MD's strife. For centuries contended that nature, steady in her plan, confused not sexual forms in man. Her systems pure intended, but carries life, outer and strange. Illustrates nature's freaks and change, virility affected, devoid of ducts, of glands and muscle. Physiologists stare, their wits be puzzled. At wound rock facts detected. This was from Philadelphia, and it was an autopsy report, and they had an artist named James Aiken illustrate the autopsy of a dead hermaphrodite, quote unquote. And in this report, after this first page, which was the beautiful, illustrious introduction, they wrote some more words about this body. Because back then, before we had the biomedical know-how to be able to cut people open while they were alive and stuff like that, the only true hermaphrodite was really one that was dead, because they can cut them open in autopsy and figure that out. So in this report from the autopsy in the 1839, I said 89 earlier, sorry. They said this person lived life as a man, was a recluse, feared exposure, took great deals to cover up, slept fully clothed, was a hunchback, had a nose that was quite like an orangutan, had discharge that came out that would make anybody nauseous or vomit if you looked at him, was celibate, had an aversion to women, and so forth. So, in the 19th century, these are the illustrations from the autopsy report. In the 19th century, we move into, this still is the 19th century. Basically, my intersex people, were looked at as mortifying, disgusting, monstrous imperfections. And I think I have Skype open, maybe, and that's going to be annoying. So, in the 1890s and the 1950s, we changed. And Alice Drager calls this period, please, the age of gonads. Does anybody know what gonads are? You might have heard your grandpa say something about gonads. I did. Well, I had gonads when I was born. I had two. So all of us here, I think I could say this, almost all of us here, I should say, when we were being developed in the womb as fetuses, feti, we all looked typical female, even the people that are raised men in here. And you had two organs here that were called gonads. And in the 4th month, depending on the washes of hormones that happen in the stomach of the mother, those gonads either drop and become testes, or they stay put and become what is known as ovaries. But they start life at the same tissue, the same formation. My case, because I have androgen insensitivity syndrome, is that they stayed up and they remained what they were called gonads, which are either pre-testes or pre-ovaries. So Draeger, this historian and ethicist, calls this the age of gonads. It wasn't until after the turn of the 20th centuries that doctors started to get a vague grasp on the complexities of human chromosomes and hormonal secretions. Before then, British and French doctors authorized themselves as the interpreters of sex. They were distressed by their inability to definitely name hermaphrodite bodies, so doctors soon came to look at the gonads as the essential signifiers of absolute sex. With their gonadal assessment of what it meant to be a man or woman, they tried to completely erase hermaphrodites off the map. Next slide. So this person was a Parisian model, and they told her when she came in to get like a testing or something, they said, oh, we found out that you have gonads, and you're actually a man, and actually, because you're dating a man, you're homosexual. So they told them, like, you need to like end this marriage because this is just not right. But what's interesting is like, it had really nothing to do with her voice, the way she walked, how her body looked, how she interacted with the world, how she perceived herself, how she perceived her relationships with others, and things like that. It was all of this gonadal assessment. It was kind of like this ability or desire to name somebody as not hermaphrodite, as either one or the other, to maintain that system of binary gender that we still have today, male and female, binary sex and gender. So, next slide, please. After 1915, Draeger says that Western medicine men entered a turning point in the management of the hermaphrodite. Still believing it was their duty to interpret everyone's true sex, doctors entered. So we left the age of gonads, and then doctors entered what is now known as the age of surgery. And this is where I was born. I was born right at the crux of the age of surgery in the mid-80s, 1986. And the age of surgery is interesting because we have things like anesthesia now. We have things like biopsies. We can do more medical technology processes in the room. So when a person is born, like that picture, or like me, and there's some ambiguity in the genitalia, a team of medical professionals comes to deal with like what is generally a sociological issue. Most of us don't have health issues. 90% of us, I would say, don't. It's all cosmetic. So they grab a team of mostly endocrinologists, pediatric urologists, and surgeons. Those are like the top surgeons. And they decide what they're going to do. What's the route of care? And generally, it's to make the child look like a female as much as possible, quote unquote normal female. Construct that genital area in a way that allows the outside world, the repetitive act of you guys seeing me as a female, so that my parents are calmed, the doctors are calmed, and society at large is calmed. But this method of this age of surgery never took into account the desires and wishes of intersex people themselves. Most of these surgeries leave most people with inability to orgasm, to have any sensation, and generally there's a lot of shame and secrecy that goes on, because when the doctors tell the parents, don't tell anybody about this, and they don't really explain what's going on, parents are not stupid. They can sense something is going on. And that, I believe, anxiety transfers into their children as well, because nobody wants to touch the topic. They don't want to talk about it. Everything's done undercover, and the child grows up and usually doesn't find out until their first sexual encounter, or the fact that they don't get a period, or they go to college and they read a college textbook about medicine and they see bodies like them with symptoms like them, like no period and things like that, that they put two and two together. And this generally leads to a life full of pain, and it needs a lot of psychosocial support, but not necessarily medical support. So, can you click once more? That was a quote by Foucault, but everyone knows Foucault talks too much and it doesn't make sense usually, so we'll just skip that. So, no, he said knowledge is not made for, what did he say? Knowledge is not made for understanding, it is made for cutting. And I just thought that was an appropriate quote. So this, and I just found out my friend, who's probably Skyping me, no, she made this diagram back in the day because she told me the other day, This isn't like doctors come around with a ruler measuring people's clitorises and phalluses in the delivery room. But generally, this is what happens in North American surgery rooms, in North American birthing rooms, is when a child like me is born, they will look at the phallus structure, whether it be the clitoris or the penis. They stretch it out, and to the eye, if it's past one, actually like less than a centimeter, like past 0.8 of a centimeter, but we'll say 1 centimeter, they determine that, well, if it's past 3, let's say, they determine it's a boy. And they're going to do everything they can to make it a boy, surgically and hormonally. If it's under 0.8, they're going to say, oh, this child is a girl. We're going to do everything we can to make it a girl. If it's in this unacceptable range, then they do surgery. So those other 2, they generally won't do as much surgery. They'll do more hormones or just like whatever. But in this middle range is where a lot of us fall into the surgical realm of things. So, next. And we're not going to talk about Judith Butler today. This is John Money. Does anybody ever heard of him? Has anybody ever heard of him? He's kind of like the grandfather of intersex surgery and protocol. And the main thing to take away from him, because you'll see it in the film, is that he, like many feminists at the time, argued that we were born clean slates. Our gender was not inherently tied into our sex. So you could take a child up until 18 months, he said, that was like the cutoff time, and change them into whichever gender you wanted to. And as long as the child grew up that gender for the rest of their life, they would assume that gender in their physicality and their brain and live out that gender. And there's a famous case that he saw over, and you'll learn about that in the film, called it's the Brian Reamer case. I think I'm saying their names wrong. It's like known as Joan and John. So, next film. And yes, the 90s. So, this is my favorite era because it had the best fashion and the best music, and the Bulls won all the time. So, what was happening in the 90s? Well, there was the ISNA, Intersex Society of North America. This was started by Beau Laurent, who was named Cheryl Chase back then, and she got this wild idea to talk about what happened to her and find other people across the country that had happened to them. She got a P.O. box, she got like a little phone with like a thing that stays on your head, like a headset, and she started getting too much mail than she could even handle. Once word was spreading about Intersex Society of North America, and that there was a place where people like me could talk and congregate with each other. This was pretty much around the birth of the internet as well, when the internet started catching on. This picture is great because it's from, I think, a pediatric endocrinologist meeting in Boston, and people from ISNA got together and called themselves Hermaphrodites with Attitude, which was also the name of their newsletter, and they protested outside with, someone help me the name of the trans group, Trans Menace, or Lavender Menace, no, that's something Menace. But they were like a trans liberation group, and they joined forces and they spoke back to pediatric endocrinologists and surgeons saying, we don't need to be medicalized, we need social support instead. Next, please. This is on the right is a medical textbook picture of what happens to a person after they have surgery. And in the biomedical point of view, this is a great result. This is, I think it says something like appearance showing no reconstruction. Okay, but what it's saying, I think, in the larger text that this is couched in, is that this is an excellent result. And then on the right is, no, it's okay. You can just go back. On the right is somebody from one of ISNA's first retreats. They thought it would be really cool to take pictures of themselves because so often we found ourselves in medical textbooks without our consent, like the person on the left probably, after they were, this is probably when they were still like knocked out of anesthesia. So on the right, people were taking the lens into their own hands, taking that power back and saying, this is what we look like, and this does not look like a vagina. So proving the point that it's more about the comfort of the outside viewer than actually the person that has to live in that body without a clitoris and without the tissue that would have let them have sensitivity during sexual interactions. Because before this, there was a clitoris there. It was just deemed too large by the medical establishment. Next, please. So I like to do this because some of you are college kids, right? Over here? College kids? I like to talk about media. Does anybody know any intersex people that are famous or actresses or actors or that you can think of that are intersex or have AIS or things like that? Nobody can name anybody that's a hermaphrodite in the media? I know someone's thinking of someone. Yes? Yes. Good. Okay. Lady Gaga. I took Lady Gaga, the clip I usually show out of the film, or out of the presentation. But yes, there's a rumor that Lady Gaga is a hermaphrodite. Do you know why? Or how that got started? Yeah. So Lady Gaga was getting off of a motorcycle, and you could see in this pixelated image like a bulge, or maybe a strap-on, I don't know. And it just hit the internet that Lady Gaga is actually a man, she's a hermaphrodite, blah, 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 blah. Thank you. Anyone else? Jamie Lee Curtis? Does anyone know that? She's like the #1 intersex actress that's not intersex in the world. I don't know how that got started, but she's never publicly said she's intersex. I don't know if she's intersex, but everyone in my friends and family growing up just knew Jamie Lee Curtis was a hermaphrodite. And I thought she was too. And I remember when I found that, I was like, oh, she's my role model, she's intersex. But there's no proof of it. So let's break it down why this happens. Why do these rumors swirl in the media? Why are hermaphrodite bodies constantly put on display? So, next slide, please. Whether it's like the 1800s where people were carted into rooms of doctors and then spread their legs open, had other people's hands on their genitals to show a room of doctors, this is what a hermaphrodite looks like in 1888. Or, next slide, please. Lady Gaga on a motorcycle. Thank you very much. That it's showing that like our bodies have always been put on display. And even if this person is not a hermaphrodite, quote unquote, that there's a desire to always figure it out. Is this person a hermaphrodite or not, you know? Once they kind of transcend some type of gender boundary, this rumor can start happening. I have no idea if Lady Gaga is. I don't actually think she is, but she might be. But that song, Born This Way, a lot of intersex kids love that song, and they sing it and they dance and they feel really good when they hear it. Next is, oh, I thought I took it out, but can you fast forward? Oh, okay, her, Jamie Lee Curtis, back in the day, looking good, step aerobics. Also a good era for fashion. Was this early 80s or like late 70s? Maybe 80s, I'm gonna go with 80s. Yeah, belt on a bathing suit, that's really cute. Next, please. Does anybody know this person? Sierra. What? Say it. Like a Boy. Yeah. So Sierra made a song called Like a Boy. Does anyone remember it or the video? And there's rumors that Sierra is a hermaphrodite. And she addresses it on a radio show that's on YouTube. You can look up. I usually show it, but we're going to watch the film later. And to me, that's her kind of talking back to these rumors. You know, she's like, all right, you want to say I'm a man, I'm a hermaphrodite, whatever. I'm going to make this song. I'm going to dress like a boy, be like a boy, talk about myself as if I were a boy. And I love that song. Next, please. So, this is, who is this? Semenya. She's from South Africa. She's an Olympic sprinter, runner. And she's really good, and she won. And as soon as she started winning, people started suspecting that she was a man, quote unquote. So they ran a blood test on her without her knowledge. Well, they said it's for like standard drugs or whatever. And then they released the results to the world media without telling her first that she has AIS, which is what I have. But what's interesting, because I played sports my whole life, AIS does not help you with sports. It actually decreases you with sports because your body blocks androgens. Androgens are testosterone. Testosterone builds muscle, endurance, and strength. And people like us have less than a person that's not intersex and was raised female and whatever. So I remember being in the weight room my whole high school life, pumping iron like everybody else, and I never got muscles. And I was supposed to be a catcher, and I was supposed to be strong and tough, and it never happened. But so Castor had this happen to her, and I got to find out in private, sort of, that I was intersex, which was a whole lot of mess and a whole healing session of years and years and years. And this person, people, you guys found out before she did. And then reporters went up to her, hey, I heard you're a hermaphrodite. And she's young. And this, to me, links back to historical representations of black female bodies in the media, linking back to Hottentot Venus, when another South African who was put on display in America for her large body parts that people were really fascinated with. And to the day, even after she died, they cut up her body parts, put them in jars, and put them in museums in countries that were not her own, so people can go buy tickets and look at her crazy external genitalia. So people that actually in South Africa, they really support Castor, and you cannot say she's a hermaphrodite in that country. I have a friend that's intersex from South Africa that told me you don't talk like that there, out of respect. Next please. Oh, this is really interesting. So after she kind of stopped running because of the controversy, she resurfaced, and her handlers, so to say, presented her to the world as a feminine person on this magazine cover. But this didn't last long. I've never seen her look like this again, and you can tell it's a publicity stint to be like, oh, look, she's a quote-unquote normal woman just like everybody else. Wow, look at Castor now. I think it's painful to have to do that, to appease people. So we will play this clip. You can just roll it, and you guys can understand what's going on.
It's a girl. Boy. I don't know. That's a boy because he got muscles. Serena Williams has muscles, but she's a girl. I guess that she does track. They're not the same persons, but they're brother and sister. Maybe he is her dad.
I think it's a boy because it has huge muscles. And it looks like a boy. So it's a girl. Whoa.
Manipulative way. Children are innocent, and if a child looked at a picture of me and did that, I wouldn't really mind, because they're kids, and they're awesome, and they're curious, and they're still. But when Jimmy Kimmel does it and says, not only, I don't know what the word against intersex people are, like intersexist words, but he also brought racism into it. So when an adult does it in a way to be mean, it's a whole different level. And this is what happens in the media. If you, after this presentation, you start watching movies, you're gonna see a lot of hermaphrodite, intersex fear and phobia in movies, like Baby Daddy. I think there's a movie called Baby Daddy with two girls from Saturday Night Live, and they're taking a test about their baby, and they're just like, as long as it's not a hermaphrodite, and they just like, so like intersex people are really aware of what's going on in the media because it's generally not positive. So just keep an eye out on that. In this next book, or this next slide, there's a picture of a book cover. It's really good. It's called Intersex in the Age of Ethics. And the intro is by a person that's not an intersex, but the whole rest of the book is short stories by intersex people. Interesting to note about this cover is in the middle, you see a naked person that's standing in front of measurements. And this is like a typical pose for an intersex person in a medical textbook. And there's a black bar across her eyes. These black bars are usually there to protect our identity, quote unquote. But this person is not intersex. She's the author of the book, and she put herself out there in a really brave way. And she said within a few days, she got calls from her friends like, why are you naked on the cover of your book? And she's like, to prove a point that those black bars don't protect anyone's anonymity. And so critiques of this have stated that actually the black bars so that the people looking don't have to feel the discomfort of a human being looking back at them that has become objectified in that way. And I agree. But check out that book if you have time. In your library, I think, you might have it. So, this is my friend Manny Mitchell from New Zealand. She's pretty much created the documentary that you'll see in about 5 minutes. And she was part of a photography project where she etched out on the negative, "I am not a monster." Also, intersex people, they're another example of a person taking that camera lens and making it theirs again. Like, not letting the person on the other end dictate what comes and what becomes the image. So I just always put a shout out to Manny because they're awesome, and they also go by the pronouns herm, H-E-R-M, and they identify as a hermaphrodite. Not many intersex people do because of the intense pain that comes and surrounds it. But Manny decided to grow out a beard because she can. Naturally, she grows a beard. She has a very feminine voice. And she lives in that space of duality, or in between where the duality of male and female dovetail. And she does it every day in a very brave way. So, next slide, please. This is me when I was born on the left and on the right. When I was first born, nobody knew anything was up. It took about a year that my pediatrician, lady, Dr. DeJacque, I still remember her. She had a little koala bear on her stethoscope. She decided to tell my parents, like, hey, your daughter's vagina looks a little swollen. Take her to Children's Memorial in Chicago. I got taken to Children's Memorial. I got blood tests ran probably, and immediately they found out my karyotype, which is your chromosomes. I had on my 46th chromosome, it was XY. Generally, females have XX. That's your sex chromosome. And also, they found out a list of other things, like my androgens were not working, so I had probably androgen insensitivity syndrome. Back then, they called it testicular feminization, going back to the gonads and the testes. So that was the time about they decided to cut me open and remove those gonads. It's not known whether those gonads were functioning or would function at puberty and let me go through a puberty without pills, but it was decided that they take them out, give her fake hormones or manufactured hormones when she hits puberty to go through puberty. So when I was 3 though, which is I think the picture on your right, I think I was 3 in that picture, they decided to do a clitorectomy and a clitoroplasty surgery, which are fancy words for, and I'm not really supposed to say this word that much, but it's for genital mutilation. That happens in clinicians' rooms today with anesthesia and fancy procedures, but it's genital mutilation. They cut off your clitoris in certain ways to remove aspects of it that people deem unnecessary. They told my parents, we're just gonna get rid of the unnecessary stuff and leave the nerve intact. But the whole clitoris is nerves, and there's more nerves in a clitoris than the whole penis combined in that little piece of flesh. So they basically removed it as much as they could to make themselves feel good and didn't tell me about that. And what's on the next slide? Oh, if you hit it again. This is flash forward to when I was 18 in college. I was taking a freshman psychology of women class and heard about this term androgen insensitivity syndrome. And I thought, oh, that kind of sounds like me. So there was a speaker coming to class, much like myself, and she talked about it. And I got to get pizza with her. And she said, hey, you need to go get your medical records. This is like the first page I think I saw on my medical records. And it says, male pseudo-hermaphrodite. These 3 words, many intersex people have had to deal with in their life. They've been raised a girl, maybe like, visiting their wedding, having a boyfriend, whatever. And then they see their medical records because they haven't been getting their periods and something's up. And they see male pseudo-hermaphrodite. And this is why a lot of people don't use the term hermaphrodite, because it's such a stigmatizing word. It's a word that people laugh at in class, laugh at in TV and movies. And then you suddenly realize, oh, I'm a hermaphrodite, this paper says, and I'm a male, and I'm pseudo. So I'm really I'm neither, really. I'm not fully either of these things. So that's what I found out when I was 18. And I also found out that a surgery I had when I was 11 for bladder stuff was also a vaginal reconstruction surgery and more of a clitorectomy that further worked on making my clitoris more acceptable, which really means I just got rid of it completely from whatever was left over from when I was 3. So you can click forward, please. That's an image. And this is the original newsletter. Or this was like a, Chrysalis, I think, is like a academic journal. And this was a picture from that thing I talked about earlier. Can you skip forward? Is there anything else? Okay, that's fine. I want to show you some other things that are going on the internet real quick, and then we'll have a Q&A. This group is the Intersex Youth, no, not the Intersex Youth. They're the Interact group, which is a group of intersex writers, bloggers, and activists that are going to be the next wave of activists. I work with them as a youth leadership intern. We have these documents here that you can take if you want. And it's us speaking back to doctors about what our experience was like and what we wish, how we wish it was different. Feel free to grab one. There's also a resource paper here that you can take out on your way out for support groups and things like that. There's also the Interface project, which two of my friends have started. And it's a bunch of videos of intersex people sharing their stories with the world. Share this as a resource with anyone you know that might need it. There's a really funny one by Georgianne. This is Georgianne, but we won't go on it because we don't have time, but you should check it out. There's also support groups for intersex folks and also support groups for their families. This is one of the biggest ones. It's the AIS DSD support group. You could see Linnell in the top right-hand corner. She was the person that first spoke at my class when I was in college, and we now live on the same block in Chicago. And there's also this Know Your Rights guide, a guide for parents that AIC puts out, which were those two women in California, Suji and her partner. They're also my boss. One of them is my boss. AccordAlliance.org has resources for clinicians and parents. And this is all on that resource sheet. That's why I'm going through it fast. DSD Families is great. There's playlists to listen to for parents to get through the times of having an intersex child. There's also playlists for children, which include that Lady Gaga song that I was talking about earlier. And then there's resources. And now there's the Q&A. You all have an evaluation form, I believe, that Ari was nice enough to hand out. Except for, okay. Please feel free to fill that out for me. There's a front and a back. And I also, at this point, open up this floor to questions and answers, which is my favorite part. So if you don't ask me at least 5 questions, I will go home very sad. And they can't be for my friends. One of them can. Yes?
So typically, at what age, I guess, are they determining what they should do?
It depends. It depends on if it's obvious at birth. A lot of our conditions are not obvious at birth. So nothing happens. When it becomes obvious or becomes known or we have an interaction with the medical establishment, then they will do it. Generally, they like to do it before we're old enough to know that it happened, but sometimes they'll do it when you are old enough to recollect that or to remember that experience. So there's really no set time. Yeah, good question. Yes?
Kind of tying in with that, like when they do it, but when you're talking to people who identify like this, when would these, I mean, obviously a child can't make that decision. So when are these kinds of discussions and things happening so that someone can make an informed decision about their own body?
Great question. There's a part I didn't go over in my presentation for sake of the movie, but there's a I wouldn't say it's a movement, but I'm doing some research around age-appropriate disclosure. So you can't really go up to a 3-year-old and be like, you have XY chromosomes and this is what this means and androgen sensitivity syndrome. But you can say things like, to a young boy that asks you a question, or to a young child, you have testosterone in your body and estrogen. Those are hormones. When testosterone goes in his body, it says, hello. And the body of the boy next to that person says, I hear you. But when it went into your body, it just echoed. And nobody said, I heard you. Or you can talk about things like purple juice and red juice as opposed to testosterone and estrogen. And you could say, you have more purple juice in your body versus more red juice. And most other girls they have more red juice than purple juice. And this is why we're going to the doctor today, to take a look, to make sure everything's okay. There's also this parent that I know that had to tell her daughter, hey, you gotta go to the doctor today. They're gonna have to do some kind of looking around, peeking around, what would make it better for you? And the child said, as long as the doctor doesn't touch me, it'll be okay if I can control my body. So the doctor got to look, but the child got to maneuver her body. And she knows about her condition. She started at like the age of 4, started calling it my intersex. It was just like, I have my intersex. And like, because, you know, it's a kid coming, apprehending the terminology. So I believe in age-appropriate disclosure as early as possible. And I think it's just something to constantly reinforce that everybody's different. And it's something to be celebrated in a way. And if you don't make the experience traumatic, it can be a positive thing in some cases, in most cases, I believe. So, yeah, thank you. I don't know if did that answer? Okay. That's 2 questions. Yes, Buki? Can you speak up?
With like these medical workers, has there been like any type of class action lawsuits or I guess people going back to the universities and like medical universities, etc. and I guess trying to get like, or just like sue them? When I see that and I think about, you know, the things that they're doing, I just wish that there is some type of way that they would have to acknowledge that what they did was terrible instead of just allowing them to continue, you know, doing all these horrible surgeries. And like what you were saying earlier in our small discussion about how in the room there are all these other doctors who aren't even related to like what's happening, or even in that video when she said that she looked under the sheet and the podiatrist was there like looking at her genitals, like, you know, so I'm just like wondering, has there been like any movement against the doctors, or like a wide yeah.
So has there been accountability or suing or class action lawsuit? Not to my knowledge. And I know there are some, I shouldn't say I know, but I have the feeling that there are some individual lawsuits. I believe in my case, the statute of limitation was too long or something. I think there's like 10 years or 8 years or something like that. There's a time window. It varies by state. So in my state, Illinois, it was like 10 or something. And also, the doctors could just say, my parents gave consent. But there's, AIC puts out that Know Your Rights document, and they also put out I think in that document is a consent, like full consent, how to give full consent, what full consent looks like, how getting a full range of options. So not just saying, your child needs to have normal sex with their husband one day and we're gonna do surgery to make that happen. Let's talk about let's talk about the full range of sexuality and how sexuality plays out in everyone's lives, whether they're straight, queer, or whatever. And, but AIC is a legal organization and they are primarily concerned with intersex children and their families. But I don't know of any lawsuits or at least class action or accountability. Oh, AIC does, with the youth, do a project called the Apology Project, where we help kids or people, even adults, write letters to their former doctors saying how they feel and then sort of demanding an apology. And we've had a lot of doctors write back. And I think it's transformative not just for the person that receives the apology, but for a doctor or a surgeon who maybe feels has complicated feelings about their profession or what they've been doing to children. So it's kind of like a restorative, transformative justice effort with that letter. But does anyone in the audience know if there's a class action lawsuit? No? Cool. That's 3. 2 more questions. Yes?
It wasn't quite clear to me, are they still doing these procedures to
Yeah.
for babies or little children, I guess?
Yes. I was just at Children's like 3 weeks ago in Chicago. It's called Lurie now. And he confirmed that it's still happening there. And he says, like, amongst my team, not so much, of course, but that's 5 people. And if someone doesn't know anything of our trainings or our theories or our team, or maybe they're entrenched in their ways, or a little bit older, it just it still happens.
Just, I'm a registered nurse. and
Oh, cool.
Thinking like, when I was in nursing school, they never really even spoke about intersex, or if they did, it was just speaking about it from a chromosomal level.
Yeah.
And they never really discussed this, this is all like totally new, like the surgeries and I knew that it happened, but I didn't realize what it all entailed and the emotions that came out afterwards. And it's like, it makes me think like why people wouldn't trust the medical profession after experiencing something like this.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually would do like an introduction in the beginning if we had more time, and I just gave a talk to nursing students, so if you want to talk after, we could talk a little bit about any questions you might have. Because nurses historically have like a social, more of like a commitment to the person and getting to know them and having that social justice interaction. Doctors are more clinical in a way, but lately with the amount of work that gets put on nurses, a lot of it gets just dehumanized in a way because you have so much pressure and not enough time. So it is important, I think, for nurses and doctors, not just doctors, but nurses to be doing what you're doing. Yeah, so thank you. I think that's the fourth question. Who wants to pressure the last one? Or we can have more. Yeah, I'll go to her and then, yeah?
Well, I have like two questions. Like, you know how when people refer to this person, like you go he or she,
Yeah.
like, would you rather them just say Jen?
Me?
Rather than
No, I don't ever, like, I'm not a person that gets too involved in wondering about my pronouns. I like Pigeon. Pigeon's my nickname. I like Pidge, Pigeon, Jen, she, they, but I don't necessarily mind. But he doesn't seem to fit me. I grew up like a really big tomboy and all that, but I've never, like, I liked being a girl. I thought girls were the best because they were really pretty and like had like cool hair and stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm so lucky I'm a girl. And so like I've never had that desire to be a boy, but I always liked masculine things. But yeah, but it's different for every intersex person. And, yeah.
And like, how about those people, the people that changed their sex? They don't have imbalanced chromosomes or anything. They just decided, like, I'm a tomboy, I want to be a guy. Like, are they considered then intersex after changing?
No, unless they're intersex, no. But generally they would just be trans people, transitioning or transgender. They've transitioned and so they're transgender if they identify as trans or not. Some might just identify as a male or a woman, and some identify as a trans male or a trans woman or a trans person. So yeah, like intersex people can transition and be a trans intersex person, but if you're trans and you're not intersex, you're not a trans, you can never really be a trans intersex person unless you're intersex. So I do know some intersex people that have transitioned, and I think they carry both identities with them, and they overlap, and they also.
You don't realize that this is happening? How that plays a role?
Family question, how does it play a strain on families? Well, I think, and I'm using myself as a reference point, some of my friends that are intersex, I really believe that it's not just an effect that happened to me with the surgery and everything and the secrecy, but it's like a ripple in a water. When you throw a rock in the water, that's the surgery or the multiple surgeries or whatever. But then the ripple outside of that is my parents, and the ripple outside of that is my sister, and the ripple outside of that is my grandparents, and then my aunts and my cousins, and the ripple gets bigger. And a lot of my family suffers, especially my mom and my dad, from like anxiety, from depression, from just having a sense of guilt always about everything in the world. So I really believe the way that we cut off communication amongst the family, you say, don't talk about it. And they have this burning desire to talk about it or to share their sense of shame, sorrow that they let this happen or that whatever. Or just, it's like restructuring how to share your emotions, and those emotions stay tucked away, but they're going to surface in other ways, whether you talk about it or not. So I think in this other film I have, the same one you saw, but it's an international version and it's longer, they'd say, what should happen? And Tiger touched on it, but other people say, like, the doctor should say, you have a happy, healthy baby, and everything's going to be fine. And when they're older, come back and see us. If we need to do anything, we will, and if we don't, we won't. But to say, we've seen this before, everything's going to be okay, congratulations. Instead of, whisper, 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 use all these words, maybe we'll do a surgery later, your child is this, your child is that, and like, it's not a biomedical problem. It needs social support. So, like psychiatry, psychology. So like, I needed therapy in my life. I didn't need surgeries and hormones. I just needed therapy. And I'm seeking that out now. But it was never an option as a child. Or support groups. They don't like to tell you about support groups very often. Anything else? Sari?
Can you kind of reflect on like the work that you're doing with the youth and like what they're saying?
Yeah.
To talk about and feel towards like.
Well, there's this one youth that I work with in Interact who writes this blog on our blog, and she talks about feeling like she's left out of a party that everyone else is invited to, and like no one invited her. And I really related with that because our culture is so obsessed. I don't know if it's obsessed, it's not like a bad thing, but our culture really likes sex. And like, as an intersex person with genitalia that has been compromised, you often feel like you're missing out. But through therapy, especially sex therapy, you learn even people without intersex histories of surgeries and shame also feel like their sex life ain't up to what it should be or what they thought it was going to be or whatever. So we're always comparing ourselves to this ideal that may or may not actually exist. With that said, I still believe that I wasn't given a proper chance to even try to attain that goal or whatever, if it's a goal. So a lot of the youth can talk about those feelings of isolation from their peer groups or from culture or from whatever. But a lot of youth talk about their intersex condition in a positive way. They grew up like 10 years after me, and that's a huge difference for some reason in terms of I go to the hotel that we have the conference at, and there's a youth section and a youth room and a youth lounge, and they're like, we're X women, let's get X tattoos, we're like X men, because they have XX or XY chromosomes, or I don't know why they say that. They love their X chromosome, and they like highlight it instead of some of the people older in the generation don't want to talk about that stuff. They want to like hide that stuff. So I think growing up in an age maybe where they had the support groups and they had youth and peer mentorship, but also just hanging out with other kids that are intersex and knowing most of my age and older thought we were the only ones. So they relate things like on the blog, I got to share with my professor about intersex and teach them, and they thanked me. And it's like, oh my God, you're like 17 and you're already an advocate. So you see the range of feeling completely left out. My writings on the blog, when I was a youth on the blog, are just like really depressing and like talking about blood and stuff like that. And then like there's other people that are like talking about faith and just being a girl or whatever, being a young boy in high school, and just the day-to-day. So it ranges the gamut. We do interviews too. So we've interviewed the mayor in Australia who's intersex and stuff like that. Yeah. Anything else? Thank you very much. Purdue Calumet, Hammond, Indiana. And invite me back soon if you want to. And I have cards and I have information, so feel free to come up and say hi. Thank you for your attention. I know 2 hours sitting is hard, so if you want to stretch, you can. And thank you very much. Have a great day.